Welcome to HR on the Rocks, a podcast for professionals that takes you behind the closed door.
Right.
Welcome back.
Take her away. Yeah.
Welcome back to HR on the Rocks. Cheers, you guys.
Yeah. Salud.
Cheers to episode 6.
Yeah.
Looks like I'm
Episode
actually
6.
drinking water. But
It
I'm
does.
not.
Mine looks like mine is a hard seltzer, so it's deceiving.
Got another añejo old fashioned going for me tonight.
I'm supporting the fine makers of Buffalo Trace.
There it is.
So thanks for tuning into this week's episode. We're going to be discussing and getting into some common HR mistakes that companies make, as well as giving some practical advice on how to maybe try to rectify or prevent those kind of problems. And so I think we're just going to kind of go around the table. And Jake, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So common HR mistakes. So I would, not to go too Shakespearean on you, but to counsel or not to counsel is kind of the question for me. I know, Justin, it's the nerd in me. Forgive me there.
As a British lit minor, you're completely offending me.
As I should. As I should. So
just because I was a British lit minor, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And you should be offended that you were season. For all the lit majors, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I still love you too. I was a language major. Anyway, so as far as the lesson today goes, I don't know that it's a lesson. So I think for me, as I considered this one and like what to talk about, I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning of the career and tell a story about a young, naive lieutenant, namely me, who probably didn't ultimately do the right thing. I think the intent was there, but could I have done it differently? I think so. So we'll get into that here in a second. But to set the stage, I think, so just hit the unit, fresh out of West Point and all the military training that has to happen after that. And when you get to your platoon, you're responsible for about 40-some people. And my singular purpose at that point was really to ensure that I was able to get these folks overseas, deployed, and bring all of them home with all their pieces and parts, right? So everyone having their fingers and toes when they came back. And so that is like the singular focus for me as I go through, all the training and everything all the lead up to deployment. And so I get to my unit, and the first thing that I do is I get introduced to my new platoon sergeant. And this is I'm going to call him Sergeant Slaughter. And Justin, you'll appreciate that reference, but and it'll make sense later. But the idea is that Sergeant Slaughter is, you're talking, 16 to 20 years in the military already, right? And so this guy is literally wearing socks that are as old as I am at this juncture. And he's got experience. And I
was going to say a wealth of some knowledge, right?
A wealth of knowledge, and I have none. Like, I have all this leadership theory training, and, I've read all the books on it, but, I didn't have any real experience, right? And I'm certain that there are college kids that come out and they have the same kind of thing where they're thrust into this deal where they're a leader of people that have years of experience in that industry. And so anyway, we're getting ready for deployment, and we get assigned this private that comes straight out of basic training, and we'll call him Private Snuffy. But Private Snuffy, I couldn't even make up a caricature of a human being that is more like this guy. It's almost like Goofy. Like if you were to go and look at, Disney characters, that's as close as I could get to him. And so this kid, it's a miracle that he has survived this far in life without hurting himself or someone else. And I have no idea how he passed basic training, but he shows up, and he's a liability to the extent that there was no chance that I was going to take him with us to deployment. So we're going through the motions. We're trying to teach this kid about life and just, how to make his bed, how to tie his shoes. We're talking very basic things. And so we get to so fast forward, a month or two into his time at the unit, and we've done everything we can at this point, and we've already made the decision, like, we probably need to get rid of this guy, but like, how do we do that, right? So his squad leader brings him into the office one day, and as the squad leader brings him into the office, he reports, say, Private Snuffy, I messed up, and he starts telling us about how he messed up. And so the squad leader shares a little bit, he shares a little bit, and I'm just sitting there listening to the whole thing, like, how is this even possible? But here we are. And the reality is Sergeant Slaughter decides to give him this 20-minute diatribe, which kind of was hilarious. The guy was a comical genius. Like, where I'm sitting there, like, being serious, thinking through everything, he's just clowning this guy the whole time, right? And so I'm keeping everything in as professionally as humanly possible at this point. And he finally gets to the point where Private Snuffy is like rolling his eyes, and he's giving all the body language cues that, like, he's not interested. He doesn't want to listen anymore. So Sergeant Slaughter pipes up with something to the effect of, like, hey, this is all well and good, but, like, if you don't quit doing what you're doing right now, I'm going to throw you a beating. That just, like, skirt, like, the record just comes off. It's like, what just happened? And I kind of look at him, and I'm like, please, in my head, like, okay, he's making another joke. He's trying to be funny. And he's like, not only am I going to throw you a beating, but, like, I'm going to do it in a way that is embarrassing to you and your whole family. And then on top of that, like, your squad leader is going to sign a sworn statement that said I never did it. And your platoon leader, me at this point, is going to sign a sworn statement that said I never did it. And I'm like, oh, geez, okay. He's serious now.
So you're saying when you join an organization and you come in as a leader and you are given employees, you shouldn't wait a couple months before bodily threats and harm? Harm? You're saying that's a common HR mistake? Is that what you're giving me?
So for sure, like, that would be a huge mistake, right? But that's not a common one. That was pretty uncommon. And so now let's rewind back to this moment. And I'm sitting here like, all right, Mr. Smarty Pants, like, you've been through this training at West Point. You've got all these tools in your toolkit. Like, what do you do now? And it's almost comical to think back at that moment, because it's like, there's no way anyone is prepared for something like that, even if they have years of experience, right? So all I do at that point is I'm like, time out. Sergeant, squad leader, get Private Snuffy out of here. The private leaves, squad leader leaves, and I turn to my platoon sergeant. I'm like, hey, man, like, I don't disagree with you that Private Snuffy probably deserves a beating. Maybe not. I don't know. His parents obviously failed him at some point. But what I will disagree with you on is, like, we're not gonna actually threaten it and then go so far as to say, like, I'm gonna get away with it, and here's why. Like, that's where I'm gonna draw the line. And, in his mind, maybe that's what they did in the old school military. I doubt it, because I never even heard of anything like that happening. But maybe in his mind it was okay. But the point is, like, I just called a big timeout, and we kind of walked away from that first conversation with, like, agreeing to disagree. And that was really it. But what I did do is I went and talked to my peers. I went and talked to some of the other platoon sergeants about the situation. I went and talked to what would eventually become, plot twist, my father-in-law. Actually, he was my battalion commander at the time. And so talked to him and got a bunch of advice, right? Solicited a bunch of advice. And, fast forward, I definitely, if I could rewind, so I say fast forward, if I could rewind to that day, I probably would handle it differently than I did then. So, like, my decision then was, in a formal written counseling, to sit down and say, you will not do this or else, essentially, right? And if you're trying to build trust with someone that, especially you're about to deploy with, like, that's a mistake. You're not going to get anywhere doing that. Now, I think, the reality is I could have approached that differently. And I think that, when it comes down to it, if I were to sit down and say, okay, Sergeant Slaughter in this case, right? I think that you decided to handle that one way. here's how I would handle that situation, and here's how I think we should handle it moving forward, and then hear him out and maybe, come to some kind of agreement on the way forward from there. That probably would have been better than the way that I did choose to handle it. And so I wish that I could kind of rewind to that moment and do that differently, because
but that's a growth. That's a growth experience, right? And
well,
any
for sure.
new leader coming in, and especially if you're getting to director level, and then you have managers, and they're trying to impress you, right? And they know some of the weak links before you even get there, and they're already trying to expose that. But to your point, taking a step back, looking at the entire system, looking at all of the personnel, and then really trying to decipher what is in that team, that's a key piece.
Yeah, and so I think to that end, the advice or the lesson from my perspective is exactly that. It's one of those things where, like, you go into the organization and you may or may not know it, you may or may not have a good idea of what's going on, but like before you, so I think you do have a counseling session, right? There is a real conversation that has to be warranted. And Melanie, at working in employee relations, how many times do conversations never happen? And then we get to a point where, that individual employee is, that the leader's sick of that employee, and they're like, I just want to be done with, private stuff here, whomever.
Yeah.
And
It's
at that point, like,
common.
yeah. And so I think, you have to have a tough conversation, and you have to be able to very clearly articulate, like, look, these are my values. These are the values I'm not going to compromise. And most companies have those things up on the wall, right? They have the company values. They maybe have a mission statement, or a set of, core, an ethics statement, or whatever it is. But the point is, like, I'm going to adhere to this. And so, like, this is the line, as clear as it could be. But, like, here's how we're going to approach this situation. And I wish that I would have done that, because I think, later on, like, we had a lot more problems naturally, right? Because he didn't trust me. And so as a young leader, like, if I could go and smack myself around and say, hey, do this differently, that's probably what I would do. But I think, it comes down to, like, what are you going to enforce as an HR leader, and what are you going to let go? And I think the ultimate question there becomes, like, are you willing to be the standard bearer in the organization? Because you have to not only know the rules and understand the rules and the handbook and everything else, but you have to be willing to enforce that too, right? So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents.
Can I
Nice.
come visit younger you and just come to your house, smack you around for a little bit, just for?
You're welcome to. Please.
Let's find a
Someone
DeLorean.
needs to do it.
But with hands down, feet down, you can't react.
Someone needs to do it for sure. So yes, I'm hands behind my back. You got me.
Yeah.
Melanie,
Tranquilizer
you
gun.
gonna join?
That's better. Yeah.
You gonna join, Melanie?
I'll bring a tranquilizer gun, because I think that's the only way.
Well, I'm sure you could invite Sergeant Slaughter. I'm sure he'd be willing to join in on that action too, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, Jake, because you say it's not that common, and I hope that it's not. But I know myself, I have been on the job working in HR with an HR employee, been physically threatened. And in employee relations, like there are cases where threats have been thrown, and sometimes it's hard to know the best way to proceed from, like, all perspectives. You're the person that's being threatened, obviously report it, but
Sure.
then when you're in a different position, like, it's hard, it's tricky.
Yeah.
Do you just hold it in? I mean, what's your advice? What do you actually, if you're the person in employee relations and you're giving bad news, because let's be honest, it's not like human resources is giving great news all the time. We're just not doing that. So
yeah, go back to the HR is fun episode, right?
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of sugarcoat stuff.
So what is
Right.
what do you suggest? Oh, that was for you, Melanie. Oh yeah,
I think that was for Melanie. Yeah, that's why I stayed quiet.
For the so you're gonna look at, would do an investigation of it, because if you're the ER person, you're coming in objectively and you're going to talk to the person that made the threat. You're going to talk to the person that was threatened, who probably is the one that came forth and said, hey, here's what happened. And then any witnesses that were there. And then from there, you're going to look at, I always look for any kind of policy violations. So most companies probably have something in the handbook that says, you can't verbally or physically hurt another person on the job. And then from there, you look at the best path for addressing it. And maybe it's, it will be like a written counseling of some sort of, it depends on if they have anything on file already, or also like like how severe it was. If they had a gun in their hand when they said it, like they're gone.
What if it's to you and you're given the bad news? If you're giving me bad news and I'm threatening you, are you gonna sit there, take it? Do you take it calm and just kind of take everything at you?
I'm going to jump in there. So this is a great question, Justin, because I've been in close to similar situations where if like folks get real, like, you're terminating them. So then they want answers and then they demand answers and they're getting more and more animated and like things start getting either loud or crazy. And what I'll say is this, like, so step one is you try to de-escalate for me, right? So for me, it's always like, hey, we're going to end the conversation here. Like it would be a hard stop. And I think I did do that, right? As I look back on the situation I just described, is like, all right, time out. Like, no, we're not doing that. Right.
And you've done that another time too, that I know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's right.
A hard stop.
Yeah. Like, hey, we're not going to continue in any capacity. Like, you're going to leave right now. And then when we cool down, we can have another discussion or conversation. Now, sometimes like security has to get involved and other things like, and I would recommend that, like, if you're uncomfortable as an HR leader or an employee relations individual that's delivering that news, I think you have to have, if you're not comfortable being able to say like, hard stop, like we're not doing that anymore, you need to have someone present that is comfortable doing that, because those situations do get very emotional. You're getting fired. Of course it's emotional, because it's very personal, right? And so, I mean, it's a great question, Justin. And I think if you're not comfortable doing it, you've got to have someone willing to be able to call that hard pause on like, hey, this is over. Like, you're leaving and we'll talk about this later.
Yeah. It's either that or no kung fu. One of the two.
I have a friend that always said, I don't know kung fu, but I know crazy.
Shockingly enough, that's what half the people are working in HR.
Anyway, moving on.
Moving right along. So, Justin, your take. Common mistake. Any advice?
Actually, mine's pretty easy since I come from the hiring side, and mine's always doing research.
That's a good one.
And that comes on many different levels. So it can come in-house recruiting, it can come from organizations outside that are coming in recruiting, but do research on your candidates. Do research people that you're bringing in, people that you want to interview. I'm not saying you have to do research on all 85 applicants if you're not lucky to have a job, or 25 applicants, but the people you're actually phone interviewing. And if you disqualified them for some reason and then you're bringing in the other ones, do that research. But here's the key. You can't just single out. You've got to do research on every single person. If you're going to do Facebook, if you're going to do Instagram, you're going to do Twitter, you're going to do LinkedIn, it can't just be for one. It's got to be for all of them, because
that's right.
That's the rules. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, so just to quickly piggyback on that, I had what turned out to be a guy that his name was in the news, and I didn't know it up to the point that I was walking him around a location, and they're like, hey, I know that guy. So a nurse pulls me aside. They're like, hey, you need to go Google his name. And so I went, and, at that point, I talked to my leader before I did anything, and they're like, okay, but we're going to Google everybody now in this specific search, and then as a policy moving forward. And so we started that day, and it turns out this guy was ultimately convicted at the time, accused of murder. It's crazy.
I know. And I have one that we're going to share in episodes later that I know both of you know, that is one of the largest blemishes on my record of all time. And what happened to Clue? But you know what? The guy was honest in the end, and that is what it is. But it is research, and that is half of this business, especially on the recruiting side. We understand you got to recruit and get the jobs, and when you do research on job descriptions of everything that you don't know, but people research in this day and age is key, and that candidates need to understand that as well. And anybody who is worth anything as a recruiter, especially in the corporate world and on the outside too, if you have anything that's out there, it needs to be, you need to watch what you post, watch what you do.
Be cognizant of what you post. Yeah.
And that goes same for leadership too, right? Because you have individuals and people working for you, and don't think that the research just goes. It also goes on the leaders who are hiring candidates who want to come in. You don't think they're doing research, Jake? I did it on you, as we said in the first or second episode.
Yeah.
I researched you. So that's, people do that, and it's more prevalent now than it used to be, because so much of your information is out there, and that's just something to always be mindful of.
Yeah.
And that's a great point, Justin. And I think we should probably make a whole episode around like the formal side of that research. So like background checks and all the other stuff that comes with that. And Melanie, I know you're all too familiar with that on the onboarding side.
Is that episode 15, 16?
I think that's a whole episode at some point later, because there's a lot to unpack there for sure. But great point.
Yeah.
Melanie, how about you?
Skeletons
Anything other fun stuff?
So my common HR mistake would be ineffective onboarding processes, which just in general, rushing through onboarding, insufficient training, or just having someone like watch the videos, sexual harassment, sit at a desk and watch those, and there's no interaction. And I think that can lead to, I know that it can lead to high turnover at companies if you don't place importance on that. And I think the solution there is to create a comprehensive onboarding program, make sure that there's, a formal orientation, training, mentorship, make sure that the new hires feel welcomed and supported, and, show them the resources that they need. And
I think mentorship is great, what you just said. Because I think that's something that's always goes by the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's somebody that's not in your department, if it's somebody you would never have, we get hired in HR, so you would expect, but what if you had, somebody else in some other department come, hey, how are you doing? I mean, that's, I think that is a very good idea.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, a mistake there that I've experienced at most jobs is just a limited social interaction, and, not facilitating those opportunities for a new hire. Because you start a new company, you don't know who anybody is. It's just, people are saying their names. And for me, it's in one ear and out the other, because you meet 20 people and it's like, okay, I need a minute to remember who you are and what you do here. But a fix to that is if you have a buddy system or a mentor system that you can put into place. And then I guess the trick with that sometimes is finding existing employees that are willing to be a mentor or to be a buddy. So maybe have some incentive there to help, make sure that employees are willing to take on that role, because I think that it is important.
Will you be my mentor here at Impact, Melanie?
I will take that into consideration. I'll totally be your mentor. I'll be like your personal Yoda.
I'm out.
But yeah, no, I remember. So I had just started a job one of the companies I worked at, and my manager, he was a good manager, but he handed me a list. He handed me my list of like new hire orientation, and on that list that I read through by myself, there was a list of people, and he had said, well, make sure that you set, schedule a time to meet with these people because you're going to be interacting with them a lot. And I was, brand new to the company. There were thousands of people that work there. And so, and he gave me a deadline. I think I had 2 weeks to meet with about 20 people or so.
And so you're
Of,
just
of varying,
knock, knock, knock.
yeah,
Hey,
of like you don't know me, but we're gonna be working together. And it was just it was from director level to manager to just regular employee. And so it was a little intimidating with the higher ups. So I don't want to waste your time. But I think what I ended up doing was I had a basic introduction, and I think I ended up baking cookies. And I brought the cookies, and I was like, "I'm Melanie. I brought you some cookies."
did you
Perfect.
did you do them on the dashboard of your car?
Um,
Oh,
no,
jeez. We're not going to talk about
um,
that's a whole different episode too, that experiment.
no, I hadn't discovered that yet. I baked them in an oven. I just made a ton of cookies, and over the course of however many weeks, and then by the end of the introductions, I forgot, I'd run out of cookies, or I'd forgot to make them for the last few people, and they're like, "Oh, I don't get any cookies,"
No
and I was like,
cookies?
"I didn't know you guys are talking about that,"
It
but
become a whole thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was my thing. I don't know what message I was sending other than I was trying to be friendly, and I felt bad about wasting these people's time because I didn't know how to make that interaction. And in retrospect, all of those people were really important and vital to what I did when I was working there. I kind of needed someone to be like, "Hey, Melanie, this is who this is. Here's kind of I needed some structure to it instead of just
So
here you go, do it
I've,
yourself."
I've seen the same thing implemented at other companies, and I think it's a great idea, but in reverse. And what I would encourage companies to do there is have somebody in HR probably, or maybe not, maybe in their department or their new leader, schedule those meetings with those other leaders and do a warm handoff. Hey,
Yeah.
they even join the first minute of the meeting where it's hey, I'm Melanie's new manager. Melanie, meet Justin. Justin is the leader for operations at this manufacturing company. Justin,
Yeah.
meet Melanie. Melanie's the new onboarding specialist or whatever, right? And so then you just leave the conversation hey, I'm out. I just wanted to introduce you guys, and then let them talk. And I think the person on the other end, so Justin in this case, needs to know this is orientation, right? So tell them about what you think about the company, tell them about, all the good, bad, and ugly, and go from there. And I think that can be done really well. And it has been done really well from my perspective. But I think to your point, just handing you a list, saying, "Hey, go."
Yeah.
Well, I to your point, that's what I had at a company. My manager, she walked me up and down 8 floors. There's 8 managers, and she intentionally booked time for 30 minutes on each one of their calendars, and not my name, not introduction, just, "Hey, I need time." Dropped me off and said, "Oh, this is what this 30-minute meeting was about. You need to talk to him." And we got to figure, and you know what? I didn't know about it. I just was given a calendar on my schedule but
Mhm.
it was a warm handoff, and
Mhm.
it actually worked out better that way because
Yeah.
Yeah.
both sides were going in on it completely blind, and it worked out great.
Mhm. Yeah. Several different approaches there you can take, but yeah, I think that about wraps it up for us today. Thanks for
Another
tuning
quick one.
in. Yeah, it's another quick one. But yeah, stay tuned. Be back next week for another sip of HR on the rocks.
Go make an impact.
Yep.